Welcome to the Divorce Podcast, where we explore all relationships, divorce, separation, and parenting apart. This episode is part of our mini-series, where we answer your questions and share practical bite-sized tips. I'm your host, Kate Daly, a relationship counsellor, divorce specialist, and co-founder of Amicable, the online legal service for separating couples. In this part 2 mini episode, we're continuing our conversation about the difficult topics many of us want to avoid during a divorce. In the previous In Brief episode, we explored why it's so natural to shy away from these discussions and why having them matters for keeping the process smoother and kinder. Today, I'll share some practical strategies to help make these conversations feel calmer, clearer, and a little bit more manageable. Now, if you know somebody, a friend, a colleague, or a family member who would really benefit from this episode, then please click the share button now. Let's move on to some practical kind of ideas. And if you've been putting off these conversations, you might want to have a pen and paper or just a way of recording this bit handy so you can jot down a few phrases. So the first thing is prepare. So preparation is key. I mean, it's boring, isn't it? But it's true. Prepare, prepare, prepare. So you might want to say something like, I'd like us to agree a clear plan for what we do with the kids during term time. Or I'd like us to start to talk about how we divide savings and what's going to happen to the house. So making them in a request format rather than starting them with an accusation or an issue is really key to being able to have that good kind of conversation. And when you're preparing, think to yourself, what is the one thing or the two things that I really want to get across in this conversation? Don't have a list of 20 because it's never going to happen. Just be more realistic about the one or two things you want to nail in that first conversation. I always think it's good as well to have a sense of what a good outcome looks like. So what would a realistic outcome look like? And also in the back of your mind, have that understanding of what am I actually going to be prepared to compromise on? Because there will be some things that are red lines for you, but there will be things that you are prepared to compromise on. And it's really important to have those in the front of your mind. So you might want to write down some of those things when you're doing your prep and some phrases that are good conversation openers so that you know you can open the conversation and you know you've got your one or 2 points that you want to get across in this conversation. So make sure you've had a think about it and just go in knowing that you've got a bit of a plan in your mind. That's helpful. The second thing is timing. And we say this so many times on this podcast, don't we? But timing is everything. So trying to raise these kinds of big issues during the middle of an argument is obviously a non-starter. I know it's tempting and I know it happens, but trying to set aside some time when you can be calm, when no one's rushing out of the door, when the children aren't right on top of you demanding lots of things, that's absolutely key. And maybe, you have to plan that bit as well. And you say something like, could we set aside half an hour next Thursday so we can have a chat about the house? Or if it's too intense to do things face to face, maybe you could start by suggesting, can we have a quick call? Or can we send each other some ideas on email about X or Y? Tech's brilliant now, so you can have a shared document that you could say, I've put a few thoughts down. Would you have a look at them and let me know your thoughts? Some things like that are just ways of starting the conversation. And making sure they're not phrased as absolutes or demands or as done deals obviously helps that sense of it being a shared endeavour. So the key is to know that you're having a conversation, that you're going to have a conversation, and that no one feels that this has been sprung upon them. And I'm saying this with a bit of a smile on my face, as my son just accused me earlier today of doing exactly that when I tried to ambush him with a big conversation I wanted to have. So listen to myself. Okay, the next tip I think is to try and use neutral language that is factual rather than emotional. So for example, rather than going in with, you've never cared about money and look what the mess we're in now and all of that kind of overloading and personalization, you can still own the sentiment. I'm worried about our finances and I'd like to sit down and have a look at them together is a much better opener because you're doing it together. It's a shared endeavor. You're owning your own feeling of being worried, and you're still getting across the sense that there's something that's not right that you want to talk about, but it's less blamey, it's less directed, and it's much easier for somebody to engage in that kind of conversation. So being solution focused, that could be a really good tip and a way forward. So you could say something like, I wanted to try and find a solution that works for both of us. That's always a good start. Or I know this is difficult, but I think it's really important we talk about it calmly. So try and talk about the issue rather than the person. So the current arrangements for the holidays just isn't working for me, rather than you're being unreasonable, or you need to change, or I need you to do this. Those things feel so accusatory, particularly when you're low on that sort of emotional glue that's often allowed those sorts of conversations to work in the past. So trying to own it, but not personalize it is really important. I think if you've had the opportunity to try and think about some shared goals, like how you want life to be for your kids at the end of all of this, is a really good way of creating a shared vision. So even if you disagree, on some of the details, you could start with the common ground. So, when you're training people in negotiations, you're always talking to them about articulating and sharing the common stuff that you agree on first. And that's the same in these kinds of conversations. So, you can start a conversation with, I know we both want the kids to feel secure and we want the divorce to have the minimum impact on them. So that is a good conversation opener. If it's about money, you could say something like, we both need to feel financially stable, and I'd like us to work towards a way of coming to an agreement on the finances that feels fair to enable that. Something like that is a really good opening starting point, rather than jumping in with, that I want the house, or that I won't touch your pension. Or, when you come in with those very transactional kind of statements, there's not very many places to go if they don't work. So starting with the bigger vision gives you a much better opportunity to have these conversations in a more productive way. Bringing it back to a shared goal kind of reminds you that you're not enemies here. Even if you're not a couple anymore, you are two people trying to sort out a problem. And if you've got kids, you are parents together. So that can just be a way of easing some of the tension and focusing on the stuff that you do share rather than the stuff that you've got to divide up. If sometimes it's just too difficult and the relationship has broken down to a point where all of that I've just been saying feels like a million miles away. And if that's the case, then that's the time to think about whether a neutral third party might be a good option. So if the conversation keeps going round in circles, or becoming too heated, or it's just too difficult to do this on your own, then a therapist, a counselor, a divorce specialist, somebody like that who can guide you through those talks and help keep things on track can be a really good idea. What they can do is they can slow down the conversation. They can intervene to reflect back what each one of you is saying. And sometimes they can help you reframe things, and that can be the absolute key to unlocking disagreement. So I always think as well, sometimes just knowing somebody else is in the room, that's the point at which people start to behave a little bit better. And also, I think it allows you to be a bit more honest because it feels a bit safer. So that containment of having that third person in the room can be really important. I think if you're going to have these conversations, it can be a really good strategy to set some boundaries as well. So if you can agree some simple ground rules before you have the conversation, that can help keep things on track. And that might be something as simple as saying, let's agree we're not going to interrupt each other. We're going to each have 5 minutes to speak without interruption, and then we'll let, the other person come in. You could agree that if things get heated, you'll just do a 10-minute walk away, and that won't be a big deal. It won't signal the end of the conversation, but you'll just, walk away for 10 minutes. And you might say, look, we're going to keep this with a tone of voice that's calm. We're going to try and speak slowly. We're going to avoid swearing, and we're not going to name call or insult each other. So even some basic rules like that, which seem so sort of obvious, They can really help at the beginning of this conversation or the difficult conversation to really frame what your intent is. And your intent is to stay on good terms. Ultimately, if things do go awry, the brain needs a minimum of around 20 minutes to reset itself. So if you've got to a really heated stage, it might be better to come back another day or to have a big long break before you try and resume the conversation. Otherwise, you sort of get into that pattern where it feels like it keeps breaking down. And that's because your brain hasn't actually come out of its fight or flight state. So it will keep getting triggered. It's a good idea, if you can, to document some of the decisions that you make. So you've got chance to really agree what's been said and also to reflect on it as well. And, we have an absolutely fabulous co-parenting app if it's decisions about the children, which means all decisions are kept in one place. You have to keep scrolling through your WhatsApp or whatever, or your messages or your email to find things. So you might want to put co-parent decisions in the Amicable Co-parenting app, or just making a note of them so that you can send each other an email and say, look, this is what I think I heard. Do you agree? And again, expressing it as something you think you heard rather than this is what was said, which really invites somebody to critique it and to pull it apart. Then again, that can be a really useful way of making sure that you are able to make progress and you can, keep things moving. So you can summarize and say something like, I don't know, we've agreed from next month, the children will be with you every other weekend from Friday after school to Monday morning, whatever it is. If you keep it as specific as possible, but you document it, then having that shared summary and that shared understanding is a really good starting point for all of this. Sometimes I think it's useful to have some words and phrases that you can borrow and use. So I'm going to give you a few now, but obviously you don't have to say these things. These are just some things that, we know can work. So things like saying, like really owning your feelings, like, I'm feeling really nervous about this conversation, but I think it's important that we have it. That can, signal to somebody that you are feeling a bit tentative and nervous. It can help them sort of tune into the tone and that you're not being accusatory or trying to bulldoze something through. You could start if there's a history of it being a bit of a sort of a back and forth relationship, you could start by saying, I'm not trying to attack you. I'd like to work this out together. Something as sort of direct as that can be really useful sometimes as well. Or, if things have escalated, phrases like, can we park this for now and come back to it when we're both feeling calmer? Those sorts of phrases can be really helpful to have up your sleeve. Or you could say something if you need time to reflect. I've had some time to think about this and I realize I might need to adjust what I asked for. That's a good climb down phrase. So if you've gone hard and now you realize that, you've talked to somebody else, you realize that's not going to happen, then you can climb down gracefully and have that conversation. Or if somebody's feeling very sort of attacked or that what you're trying to suggest is unfair, you can acknowledge that and say, I hear that this feels unfair for you. Why don't you tell me more about what would feel fair, and invite them to come back with something? So you don't have to parrot these phrases out or make them sound weird. You can obviously put them into your own words. But the point is just to give you some food for thought about phrases that might work if you're going to have these difficult conversations. So some final thoughts. It's normal to avoid difficult conversations. So if you've been avoiding tough conversations, I want to say this. It is totally understandable. You're not weak. You're not failing. You are just being very human and you're trying to do something which is actually really hard. But often the conversation you're dreading is also the one that will bring you ultimately some relief. It might be clarity around a scary thing, but it allows you to move forward. And that's the key rather than staying stuck. It can be very easy to get into a really stuck place with a divorce or separation and to keep going round and putting off the inevitable and some of the decisions that have to be made. And sometimes feeling stuck feels better than feeling completely discombobulated. So I get that. But honestly, it will be a relief when you start to move forward. And the thing to remember is you don't have to do everything at once. So you can start with one topic, prepare it, choose your moment, use the calm language, Remember your shared goals, especially if you're co-parenting, but you can take one topic at a time and just break this down into smaller steps. And if you think you do need support with those conversations, or you want some guidance on anything that I've talked about in this mini episode, or separation or co-parenting in general, then there are loads of free resources on the Amicable website. We've got tools, we've got blogs. You can also book a free 15-minute consultation with one of our divorce specialists. So please remember, if this is a podcast that means something to you and you need some help, please reach out. We're there to help and support. And like I say, all of these resources are free. So please do get in touch. Now, if you found this episode helpful, or you know somebody who is avoiding a difficult conversation in their divorce or separation, then please do share this episode with them. It might be exactly what they need to hear today. Thank you very much for listening to the Divorce Podcast. I'm Kate Daly, and I'll see you on the next episode.